What the hell do you think you're doing out here, Tanisha? Morgan Anderson's voice cut like steel across the open field. He hadn't set foot on this ranch in over a decade. He expected decay, weeds, land too dead to remember him. Not this. Certainly not her. Tanisha Hudson straightened slowly from the soil, her hands still blackened with earth. She wore a faded blue work dress, sweat shining at her temples, a stubborn strength in the line of her shoulders. A basket of corn husks sat beside her boots. She didn't flinch at the sound of his voice. If anything, it was as though she'd been waiting for it. "This isn't trespassing," she said flatly. "I've been working this land for years." "Working it?" Morgan barked, stepping forward, Italian leather shoes sinking slightly in the dirt. "This is my land. My family's land. And don't tell me those kids over there belong to you." He jabbed a finger toward the overturned crate beneath the lone oak tree. 3 children sat there, husks and cobs in their tiny hands. Harper, Manson, Liam, barefoot, dusty, wide-eyed, and all 3 with storm blue eyes, the exact shade Morgan had seen in his own mirror every morning of his life. His breath snagged in his chest. Tanisha bent to lift the basket, but a folded envelope slipped from her pocket, landing at her feet. Morgan's pulse spiked as he stepped forward, anger flaring. "Is this some kind of trick? You vanish for years and show up on my ranch with children who—" He stopped. The words tangled. The children were watching him now, their eyes glinting with the unmistakable mark of bloodline. His bloodline. He staggered back a step. "That's not—" His voice cracked low, disbelief shaking the air between them. "That's not possible." Morgan's jaw set. "Say something that makes sense." Tanisha didn't flinch. "I told you. I've been working this land." "Under whose permission?" "Under the kind that comes with sweat." He hated how those words landed. Clean, simple, hard to argue with. He hated the envelope near her boot even more, a square of truth daring him to pick it up. He moved again, and the ground betrayed his balance. The irrigation trench, long ago silted and disguised by weeds, caved slightly under his weight. He caught himself with a curse. The sound pulled a wince from Tanisha, then a breath she tried to hide. Liam slid off the crate and padded closer on small feet. He stopped a few steps from Morgan and raised the rag slowly, like a truce flag. Tanisha's voice softened without losing its edge. "Back to the crate, baby." Liam looked to Morgan, then to Tanisha, and obeyed. The rag stayed in his hand like a promise not yet used. Morgan dragged his stare back to the children and, against his will, started doing math, the only kind that had ever scared him. Ages. Months. The year he'd left the county. The year he'd bought his first building. How long it takes for corn to push up after good rain. How long a secret can stay buried before it decides to grow. He spoke to the only thing that still made sense. "Pack your things. You and them. I'll have someone drive you into town. This isn't a debate." Tanisha's mouth barely moved. "There's nothing to pack that isn't part of this ground." He scoffed. "You're calling defiance dignity now?" "I'm calling it the truth." Silence settled for a beat, filled by wind in the pecan leaves and the paper scratch of corn husk against crate. It would have been easy, so easy, to step back into the armor that had built him. Policy, threat, contract. But the armor was loud, and the field felt like it wanted quiet. Then Harper's voice, clear and small, cut through the space between all of them. "Mommy, is that man our daddy?" Everything in him misfired. And before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Now back to the story. Tanisha didn't look at Morgan. She looked at her daughter. "Peel slow," she said gently. "You'll waste the kernels if you rush." Harper's hands obeyed, but her eyes never left Morgan's face. His own eyes, reflected back at him, dared him to lie, to turn away, to be the kind of man who could step on a worm and never feel it. He had done worse for money. He had done worse for less. He found air, then words. "No one talks to me like I'm not listening." Tanisha finished. "Maybe try it." He laughed once, no humor in it. You were a maid in my father's house, Tanisha. You ironed napkins for a dining table that sat 10 men whose decisions I now own. Don't rewrite what this is. Her chin lifted a millimeter. I cleaned a house. I also paid attention. To what? How this land gets treated when no one loves it. He wanted to say he loved this place. But he'd left it. He wanted to say his name meant something here. But the last time he'd seen the North Pasture, he'd been late for a flight and had waved at it like a donor waves at a scholarship recipient. Polite, distant, already moving on. He pointed at the envelope. What is that? Something you should have sent, she said. The heat doubled. To who? Does it matter if you never meant to deliver it? It matters if you're using it as a prop. Or as proof. He stepped closer. You think a letter changes the fact you're squatting on my land? Tanisha's stare didn't waver. I think you're afraid of what the paper says. Manson slid from the crate now, moving slower than his brother had, more deliberate. He picked up a husk that had fallen near Morgan's shoe, brushed dust from it with a small palm, then set it neatly on the crate. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The quiet ones rarely do. Harper couldn't help herself. Mommy, if he's our daddy, does that mean he's staying for dinner? Harper, Tanisha warned softly. What? Harper blinked. People eat. Liam, still clutching the rag, inched back toward the crate and sat beside his sister like a guard dog in a child's body. He never took his eyes off Morgan. Morgan felt the day tilt. Deals had collapsed under him and he'd never swayed. Reporters had thrown accusations and he'd smiled until they starved. But a little girl's question about dinner pressed against a part of him money had never reached. He turned to the horizon for something easier to fight. The windmill. The creek line. The fence line that needed replacing 3 summers ago. He looked back at Tanisha and aimed for procedure, the last refuge of a man losing ground. I'll have my attorneys call the sheriff. You can explain your years here to someone who writes things down. Do that, she said. Words have a way of finding their way onto paper. Are you threatening me? I'm reminding you. Of what? That the truth doesn't need permission. The envelope at her boot seemed to pulse. He imagined his name scratched on its face in ink, imagined the version of himself who had written it, young enough to be honest, arrogant enough to think honesty could be postponed. He blew out a breath that tasted like anger and humiliation. This conversation's over. Tanisha nodded once, like a judge marking a line. Then go. He didn't move. Harper's corn cob slipped, and she giggled, then caught it like she was saving a life. The sound felt like Sunday mornings he hadn't earned. Liam leaned into her shoulder. Manson watched the way Morgan held himself, shoulders, jaw, hands, collecting data he'd use later when he could name it. Morgan forced his voice steady. This is not possible. Tanisha finally looked at him, really looked, and the pity in it was the worst wound of all. Everything you think is impossible, she said, started as a seed somebody planted while you were gone. He could have left then. Should have. Instead, he bent to seize the envelope. Tanisha's boot nudged it back just enough. A warning. A boundary. A choice. He straightened slowly, pulse loud in his ears. I'll be back, he said, because power hates silence and men like him hate feeling small. We'll be here, she answered. He took 3 steps toward the gate and stopped. Behind him, Tanisha bent to the soil and pressed her palms in like a prayer. The kids went back to peeling corn. The ranch breathed. The past waited. And the man who had everything felt, for the first time in a long time, that he might have nothing that mattered. He walked to his car without looking back and still saw those eyes every time he blinked. The drive back to town was a blur of dust and broken memories. Morgan gripped the wheel harder than he needed to, jaw set as if he could crush the past into silence. But the truth was already awake, breathing, running loose across his land in the form of 3 children who mirrored his eyes. And behind those eyes stood Tanisha Hudson, the girl he had once dismissed as invisible, now standing unshaken on his soil. He remembered her first days at the ranch, little more than 18, arriving with a shy smile and quiet hands. His mother had hired her, saying the house needed a dependable pair of eyes. Tanisha was quick with chores, blending into the background like shadow against walls. No one looked at her twice. No one except Morgan. He never admitted it, but even then, he noticed the way she lingered near the kitchen window after dusk, staring out at the fields like she was listening to something the rest of them had forgotten. The memories unfolded without mercy. The night his father berated her for spilling a tray of glasses, crystal shards glittering across the marble floor. She had stood small, head bowed, and yet her hands never trembled as she picked up the pieces. He had wanted to speak then, to tell his father to stop, but he had swallowed the words, too afraid of revealing how much he cared. And then there was that night, the one he couldn't push away no matter how many skyscrapers he built, no matter how many women came and went in his arms. The night before he left Texas for good. A storm had rattled the windows, and he had found Tanisha in the laundry room, folding clothes by candlelight. Conversation had slipped into laughter, laughter into silence, silence into the kind of closeness that could only lead to one thing. He had kissed her first, though he remembered it as her forgiving him before he even asked. The night they shared had been tender, reckless, unforgettable. And when the morning came, he boarded his flight and left it all behind as if it were nothing more than a forgotten dream. Now, in the privacy of his car, Morgan admitted the truth. It hadn't been nothing. It had been everything. And maybe those 3 children were proof that the night had never ended for Tanisha. His mind jumped to the envelope. The letter he had written in a hotel room weeks after leaving, drunk on regret and guilt. He had poured himself into it, words about how she mattered, how he had made a mistake, how he would come back for her. But he never sent it. He folded it, sealed it, and left it to gather dust in a drawer, buried under stock reports and contracts. Morgan had traded Tanisha's loyalty for a billion-dollar empire. He had left her to the silence of the ranch while he conquered skylines in New York and Los Angeles. Yet sitting alone in his luxury car, the glow of neon wealth meant nothing. He was haunted by the girl in the laundry room, the woman in the field, and the children with his eyes. Ghosts of the past were not confined to memory. They lived in flesh, blood, and truth, waiting for him to answer what he had buried. He didn't drive to the airport. He didn't call his driver. He didn't even head back to the glossy hotel where the front desk would greet him by name and slip him keys to a suite that smelled like citrus and money. Morgan turned off the county road and into the horseshoe lot of a low-slung roadside motel, whose neon sign flickered like a tired heartbeat. He took room 7. The door stuck halfway and then gave with a groan. Floral bedspread, bolted nightstand, a Bible in the drawer that had been opened so many times the onion skin pages feathered at the edges. He sat on the bed and pressed both hands against his eyes until the phosphine stars burst and faded. 3 children with his eyes. Tanisha in his soil. An envelope at her boot that carried the weight of a life he had not lived. He slept badly, half dreaming of pecan leaves and corn silk, half hearing the thin wall AC rattle like a loose memory. At dawn, he rose, showered, shaved with a disposable razor that nicked his jaw, and drove back to the ranch as if he had been summoned. He told himself he was there to assess risk. He knew better. He was there because something in him had turned. He parked just off the drive and walked in. The morning had a clean edge. The sun sat low and deliberate, lighting up the long, stubborn rows Tanisha had carved out of neglect. He found them where he expected to, beneath the pecan's patient shade, perched on that old crate like judges convened. The girl, Harper, saw him first and set her cob of corn down with ceremony, as if laying aside the gavel. "You came back," she said, as if announcing a fact to the sky. "For now," he said, and immediately hated the hedge in it. "Are you staying for breakfast?" Harper asked. "We have eggs when the chickens remember how to be nice." "Harper," Tanisha warned, not looking up, her hands deep in the earth the way they had been yesterday and the day before that. "Let the man breathe." "I'm just asking," Harper said. "People eat." Manson had not moved. He sat with his elbows on his knees, studying Morgan the way you study a puzzle with one missing piece. He flicked his eyes to the left, the right, made some private calculation, and looked away. Liam slid closer by an inch, then another, clutching a battered toy truck with one missing wheel. He held it out without a word. Morgan blinked, caught off guard by the offering. The truck weighed almost nothing. The gesture weighed a ton. "Thanks," he said, and his voice came out softer than he meant. Liam nodded, a solemn little priest satisfied with the exchange. Harper leaned in, conspiratorial. "Why do your eyes look like ours?" "Harper," Tanisha said again, but there was a smile in it that didn't quite reach her mouth. Morgan could have lied. Could have said genetics are funny sometimes. Could have said all kinds of things men say when they're trying to escape the straight road that leads to truth. Instead he said, "Because I think we're connected," and felt the ground of his life tilt 1 degree toward honesty. "How?" Harper asked, merciless in that clean way only children can be. "Harper," Tanisha murmured, this time with a warning mother's used to keep a room from splitting. "Okay," Harper said, but she was still watching him as if a better answer might fall out of his suit jacket if she waited long enough. The day warmed and swam. Morgan stayed. He carried a crate without being asked. He fixed a sagging hinge with a pocket tool he'd brought from the car, returning it to a door that had been waiting for a man to do more than talk. He said almost nothing. The children said almost everything. Harper's questions came like pebbles skimmed across water. "Do you travel all the time? Do elevators in tall buildings make your ears pop? Do you know how to whistle with your fingers? Can you do this?" She crossed her eyes. He tried and failed. She laughed like it was summer. Manson stayed observant, skeptical, a boy who trusted lanes and signals and was trying to figure out whether this new driver would swerve. When Morgan tightened a loose gate wire, Manson's mouth twitched as if conceding a point he hadn't intended to award. "So you fix things," he said at last. And it wasn't praise exactly. It was reconnaissance. Liam hovered at the edges, shy but loyal, drifting toward Morgan with offerings. A feather, a smooth stone, a walnut. Each time, Morgan accepted as if he were being knighted. Serious, grateful, careful not to crush whatever was being placed in his palm. By noon, clouds shouldered in from the south like a rumor that turns out to be true. Tanisha looked up, squinting hard toward the barn. "We're getting a blow," she said. "If you're staying, get ready to work. If you're not, move your car to the higher patch or you'll float it to the highway." "I'm staying," he said too fast. She nodded once, as if confirming something she had privately suspected and refused to name. Then barn doors first. Wind came ahead of rain, a mouthful of dust, the metallic breath of the weather turning. The pecan rattled the way the motel AC had rattled. Only this was alive and wide and coming to take what wasn't tied down. They ran, Tanisha and Morgan flanking the kids, shepherding them into the house before doubling back across the yard. Thunder rolled like a truck over planks. The first slap of rain felt hot, the way Texas sometimes throws a punch before it cools your cheeks. "Latch the south door," Tanisha yelled over the wind. Morgan shouldered into the barn, bracing the slab of wood as it bucked. He dragged the crossbar up and through, the old iron screeching. The western door banged like a drunken man in a hallway. He sprinted, grabbed the rope, yanked hard, and slipped his weight against the seam until the bar slid home. The smell of hay and old leather flooded him. Horses stomped and snorted, eyes wide with the animal knowledge of storms. He moved down the aisle, palm to flank, voice easy. "It's all right," he said, and didn't realize he was saying it to himself, too. Lightning flashed flat and close. The world went white and then back to itself. In the strobing half-dark he saw a gap beneath the loft stairs where the wallboard didn't quite meet. A mouse hole, he thought, except that something white winked from the crack when the wind pushed and the boards flexed. He wedged 2 fingers in and pulled. The wall protested, then gave, revealing a shallow void that had been carved behind an old shelf. Inside lay a cigar tin the size of a man's palm, dented, lid stiff with rust. He popped it with his thumb. The hinge cried. On top, wrapped in wax paper, sat a cluster of hospital bracelets, 3 small circles of plastic, sun-yellowed with time. Beneath them, a Polaroid that had stayed too long in the dark. His breath caught at the image as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. Him. Younger by the width of a decade. Hair damp with sweat he didn't remember breaking. Face soft in a way success had since sanded down. And in his arms, impossibly small, 3 bundles swaddled in cotton. Their eyes were closed to the world. Tanisha was in the frame, too. Exhausted, luminous, a halo of hair escaping a braid. She looked at the camera like a woman who has climbed out of a storm and is still listening for thunder. He leaned his shoulder against the nearest post. The barn tilted around him. The rain roared, but it was far away. The Polaroid shook in his hand. "No," he said, but not like denial. More like a prayer someone might answer with a different photograph. He had no memory of this. None. He searched the corridors of his mind the way a man searches a house for something he knows he owns. The junk drawer, the back closet, beneath the bed, and found only dust. Blank wall where a door should have been. Silence where a cry should have lived. He tucked the bracelets and the photo back into the tin and slid it under his jacket like contraband smuggled across a border he didn't understand. Then he ran for the house through rain that hit sideways. Tanisha had the kids corralled in the kitchen, storm routine polished by use. Towels down. Lantern on the counter in case the power went. Liam clutched the rag. Harper stood on a chair, chin lifted like the head of a committee. Manson was counting seconds between lightning and thunder, lips moving, index finger raised for each mile. "Found something in the barn," Morgan said. He placed the tin on the table. Tanisha's eyes darted to it and then to him. She did not move for 3 heartbeats. Then she came forward, slow, as if approaching an animal that might spook. She opened the lid and looked down. For a moment, every line of her face softened, as if she were remembering the taste of water after a long drought. Her thumb brushed the bracelets, turning them to read the names printed in tiny, stubborn letters. Harper Hudson, Baby A. Manson Hudson, Baby B. Liam Hudson, Baby C. She didn't pick up the photograph. She didn't have to. She knew what it held. He slid the Polaroid free and set it between them. The kitchen light made the colors ghostly, blues too blue, whites too bright. He forced himself to look at his younger face, cradling the 3 new lives he had somehow set down and walked away from. "Why didn't you tell me I was there?" His voice scraped up raw. "Why didn't you?" He couldn't find the rest of the sentence. Tanisha lifted her eyes to his and held them there. She took a breath that sounded like the kind you take before you dive under a wave. "I did," she said. He frowned. "No, Tanisha." "I did," she repeated, firmer. "When you heard I had put to bed, you came to the hospital once. At night. You held them. You cried. You kissed my forehead and told me you were sorry. And then you left. The next morning I called. The line went to your assistant, who said you were on a plane. The next day, I called again. You didn't pick up. A week later, your father arrived at the house." "My father." The word dropped heavy between them. She nodded. "He asked me very calmly if I was ready to move on with my life without entanglements. He said he would make sure you did the same." Cold went through him so fast it felt hot. "What did he do?" Tanisha's mouth pressed thin. "He brought a man with him. Said he was a doctor. Grief specialist, he called it. Your father said you'd been under stress, that sometimes men in your position developed distortions. He said the man could help you set aside whatever didn't serve you." Morgan stared. The room seemed to pull backward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said quietly, "that your father took you to a hypnotist. You came to me once more after that. Eyes clear, manner polite like a stranger asking for directions to a cafe that doesn't exist. You put money on the kitchen table without looking at me. You asked me to take care of myself. Then you left. And after that, you didn't remember. Not the night. Not the triplets. Not the way you held them like they were the only true thing left on earth. The tin between them might as well have been a live wire." He reached for the counter because his legs were not the fact he believed them to be. The children were silent now, even Harper, as if some old law of the house required it when certain words were spoken. "My father wouldn't," he began, and then stopped, because his father would and had done things that won auctions and broke people. He tried again. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you send the letter?" she said, almost tender. I found it in one of your jackets you'd left here. I kept it. It said you would come back. I waited. I learned what waiting costs. He looked down at the photograph. His younger self looked back, unaware he was about to be erased from his own life. Something inside him folded in on itself and then unfolded, like paper pressed flat and then opened to show every crease. I didn't choose to forget, he said, hating how thin it sounded. No, she said. But you chose who held the power to make you forget. Lightning flashed. The thunder came fast on its heels. 1 mile, maybe less. The storm was sitting on the roof now, a living thing that wanted inside. Liam took a step toward Morgan and, as if remembering his mission from the yard, held up the toy truck again. Morgan took it, his hand shaking. Harper slid off the chair and reached for Tanisha's elbow, small fingers sure and warm. Manson looked from the photo to Morgan's face and back, as if trying to reconcile 2 maps of the same country. Morgan closed the tin, not to hide what it contained but to keep it from blowing away in the wind of what he finally knew. He met Tanisha's eyes. The hurt in them was not theatrical. It was work-hardened, weather-tested, the kind that had built a life in the same way she had built the garden, one stubborn row at a time. I'm here now, he said, and the words were unworthy of the room that had earned better. I know, she said. Storm's not over. He nodded. For the first time since he'd driven back into this county, Morgan understood that the past wasn't past at all. It was present, alive, with a name, Triplets, and eyes the color of a storm he could finally see. The storm moved off in the night, leaving the world scrubbed and sharp. Dawn put a pale edge on every fence post. A hawk wrote its slow alphabet over the pasture, and somewhere behind the barn a rooster discovered, with great surprise, that it was morning. Morgan didn't go to the motel. He drove to town instead, past the diner with the chipped coffee mugs, past the shuttered feed store that still carried his grandfather's name on its sign, to a squat brick building where his family's attorneys had paid the taxes of 3 counties with billable hours. The brass plaque read Barton, Redding and Cole. The door weighed as much as a confession. The receptionist recognized the Anderson jawline on sight and produced a smile ironed flat by training. Mr. Anderson, of course. I need access to my mother's estate file, he said. Full file. Originals. She blinked, recalibrated, and made 2 calls. 10 minutes later, he was in a conference room the color of dry money. A man with winter hair and summer teeth entered carrying a cardboard archive box like a priest with a reliquary. Clive Redding, the man said. I handled a portion of your mother's affairs. He set the box down with a little ceremony, as if sound might unlock ghosts. What are we looking for? A will. Any codicils. Any deeds tied to the ranch. Redding's eyes flickered. Lawyers measure time differently. The silence between his inhale and the reach for the lid counted for more than an hour. They worked without pleasantries. Folders came out like ribs. Last will and testament. Inventory of assets. Charitable bequests. Letters of instruction. 2 thick binders of ranch documents. Mineral rights, easements, water. Morgan's mother's handwriting appeared and disappeared. Flourishes in the margins, tiny notes that smelled like lavender and sternness. He hadn't realized how much he missed the sight of her S's. And then there it was. Codicil. Dated in the last summer before she died. Witnessed by a nurse, a neighbor, and the family priest. Redding hesitated a fraction before he slid it across the table, open to the single-typed page. I, Eleanor Jean Anderson, add this codicil to my last will and testament as follows. The words were clean. Stripped of sentiment. They didn't need a violin. They only needed oxygen. Regarding the parcel commonly known as Anderson Home Ranch, full legal description attached, I direct that upon my death the property, including all improvements thereupon, shall be transferred by deed to Ms. Tanisha Ruth Hudson, as a personal bequest for services rendered and loyalty shown, on the condition that she shall maintain the residence and land in good faith. Morgan read it twice, then a third time, the letters refusing to blur. His mother's signature flared at the bottom. Decisive, familiar, the same hand that had signed his field trip permission slips and 100 overdue checks to local charities. Attached to the codicil was a warranty deed already prepared, blank only where grantee would be written. Beside the deed was a sticky note in his mother's pen. File promptly. Do not burden the girl with delay. His throat closed. The room leaned. He pressed his knuckles to the table until the wood remembered him. Why wasn't this executed? His voice sounded far away, like an old recording. Redding did not pretend surprise. He tapped the box as if to steady himself on it. Your father disagreed with your mother's intentions. He asked us to hold until further review. Hold, Morgan said softly. Hold what belongs to someone else? Redding's gaze fell to a middle distance where all difficult answers live. Your father believed the ranch had implications for the corporate structure. He proposed an alternative arrangement. A trust that would care for Ms. Hudson in other ways. Other ways, Morgan repeated. Like not honoring my mother's instructions. Redding folded his hands, a church of fingers. I am an officer of the court, Mr. Anderson. I obey clients. Your father was the executor. He gave direction. My mother gave direction. She died, Redding said gently. An apology folded into the fact. So you buried the deed. We deferred. Because a maid owning Anderson land offended a man who measured people by where they sat at dinner. Redding didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was a signature. Would the county have a record? Morgan asked. The last thread his pride could reach for was procedure. Redding shook his head once. We never filed. The deed wasn't recorded. And you kept it, Morgan said. Here. In a box. So the ground could lie about who it belonged to. Redding swallowed. I am sorry. He gathered the codicil, the unfiled deed, the attached legal description, and the sticky note that smelled nearly like his mother, and left the building with a box-shaped hole on the table where a better version of his family should have been. He drove back to the ranch in silence. Tanisha was out near the barn with the children. She looked up as he approached, sweat darkening her collar, eyes steady as ever. We need to talk, he said. In the kitchen, he spread the codicil and deed across the table. The children's flowery fingerprints from last night's storm preparations still smudged the wood. My mother left this ranch to you, he said, voice hoarse. Tanisha's hands hovered over the papers. Slowly, she touched the sticky note his mother had left. Do not burden the girl with delay. Her throat worked, but her voice stayed calm. I know. She trusted me. Morgan swallowed hard. And I mocked you. Called you a squatter. God, I tried to erase you from the very soil my mother gave you. Tanisha didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She looked at the document, then at him, as if weighing which truth was heavier. I never wanted power, Morgan. Just a place where my children could grow without shame. His shame burned hotter than any storm. He had built an empire but left her invisible, stripped of recognition his mother had meant her to have. Will you file it now? She asked quietly. Yes, he whispered. We'll file it together. Her eyes flickered, but her posture stayed strong. Then let the world catch up to what your mother already knew. From the doorway, Harper's small voice broke the silence. Mommy, does that mean this place is ours? Tanisha rested a hand on her daughter's head. It always was. Morgan lowered his gaze. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of dignity that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, it simply endures. Tanisha had carried it, raising 3 children with storm-blue eyes, never claiming victory, never asking for applause. And now, the papers on the table made clear what his arrogance had blinded him to. The woman he once called powerless had more rightful claim than he ever did. The land, the legacy, the truth, it all belonged to her. Morgan had spent years surrounded by glass towers and marble floors, but the ranch was different. Here, dignity wasn't measured in billions. It was measured in sweat and calluses. So he tried. He started with the simplest task, hauling water to the chickens. The first bucket sloshed half its contents down his designer jeans, and Harper burst into laughter. City hands, she teased, clutching her belly. But when he set the bucket down without complaint and went for another, she squinted, almost impressed. Okay. Not bad. Tanisha watched from the porch, arms crossed, not rescuing him from embarrassment. It was a test, and she wanted to see how long he'd last before running back to air conditioning and boardrooms. By noon, Morgan had patched a sagging fence post, dropped a hammer on his toe, and learned that chickens attack if you collect eggs without respect. Harper giggled again when one pecked his sleeve. "You're terrible at this," she declared. But then she softened, hands on her hips. "Still, you fixed the broken coop. I'll call you King Fix-It." The title stuck. Manson raised an eyebrow but said nothing, while Liam clapped shyly as if crowning him with invisible laurels. For the first time, Morgan felt something warm settle in his chest, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could belong here. The rhythm of the ranch worked on him. Morning chores, lunch in the shade, evenings mending small things that had been ignored too long. The silence between him and Tanisha was sharp, filled with history neither dared unpack. But every so often, their eyes met, longer than necessary, carrying anger, hurt, and something else neither wanted to name. One evening, he brushed dirt from his hands and turned toward her. "I don't belong here, do I?" Tanisha looked at him hard. "You belong where you put in the work. The land doesn't care about your bank account." Her voice was steady, but the undercurrent was undeniable. Beneath the anger, something old stirred. She remembered the man who had once kissed her under stormlight, and he remembered the woman whose silence had always hidden a strength he envied. The fragile peace didn't last. A black car rolled up the drive one afternoon, tires crunching gravel. The man who stepped out wore a suit too slick for Texas heat, his tie the color of polished steel. He adjusted his sunglasses, surveying the land with disdain. "Morgan Anderson," he said smoothly, extending a hand. "Daniel Clark. I represent Horizon Acquisitions." Morgan shook it, wary. "And what do you want?" Clark smiled thinly. "Simple. Your ranch, this land. We're prepared to offer a very generous package. 7 figures. His eyes flicked to Tanisha. "Though I see you've diversified your tenants." Tanisha's spine straightened. "This isn't for sale." Clark chuckled, looking at the weathered chicken coop, the patched fences. "Come now. A few chickens, a garden. This place is barely worth the soil it sits on. But to us, it's valuable. Oil rights, development. You and your operation here can't stand against that." Morgan felt the air shift. The children stood behind Tanisha, Harper glaring with her small jaw set. Liam clutched her dress. Even Manson's silence was heavy, his eyes hard on Clark. Morgan stepped forward, jaw tight. "This ranch isn't on the market." Clark tilted his head. "Everything has a price. Even memories. Even pride." He slipped a card onto the porch rail and walked back to his car, smirk never fading. The engine growled down the lane, leaving dust and tension behind. Inside the house, the silence thickened. Morgan picked up the card and snapped it in two. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Tanisha's gaze burned. "Then we stand firm. This land isn't theirs to buy." Morgan nodded, but inside, the cracks in his armor widened. He was no longer sure if he was protecting the ranch for his family's name, or for the woman and children who had shown him what dignity looked like. And for the first time, he realized, maybe those reasons didn't have to be different. By late afternoon the sky darkened, clouds rolling in like a wall. The air turned heavy, the kind that made the dogs restless, and the pecan leaves turned their pale bellies to the wind. Tanisha knew the signs. "Storm coming," she said from the porch. "Get inside." The children hurried toward the kitchen, gathering lanterns and towels with practiced speed. Only Manson lingered, staring at the sky. "Barometer dropped," he muttered, then followed. Morgan didn't head for shelter. He sprinted toward the barn. "Morgan!" Tanisha shouted, but he only waved her off. "Barn doors first." The wind hit him hard, carrying dust and grit. The south door bucked, nearly tearing the rope from his hand. He threw his shoulder against it and forced the crossbar in place. The west door slammed open and shut like a giant's heartbeat. He lunged, caught the edge, and dragged it closed, wood rattling beneath his grip. Inside, the horses were frantic. Hooves clattered. Eyes rolled white. He moved down the stalls, hand to flank, voice steady. Easy. It's all right. A young bay reared, nearly striking. Morgan grabbed the halter and pressed him back to calm. His breath came ragged, sweat mixing with the first spatter of rain. Above, something heavy shifted in the loft. He climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time. A cracked window let wind tear through, lifting a pallet of hay toward the edge. It slid just as thunder exploded overhead. For a terrifying moment he felt himself sliding with it, but his boot caught the joist. He clung to the beam, hauled the pallet back, and tied it down with baling twine until his arms ached. By the time he climbed down, his shirt clung to his back, his hands raw. Blood streaked from a cut at his brow. But the barn held. Tanisha met him at the door, soaked and carrying rope. "Chicken run," she said. "The latch is gone." Together they fought their way through rain that fell sideways. Morgan braced the coop while Tanisha tied it off, fast and sure. Lightning flashed white across the field. Thunder followed on its heels. "Inside!" she yelled. "Generator!" he shot back, running toward the shed. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Satisfied, he bolted for the porch. Inside, the children were already in storm routine, towels down, radio tuned to warnings. Tanisha herded them toward the hallway. When Harper saw Morgan, her eyes locked on the blood at his brow. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing," he answered with a grin he didn't feel. But she didn't laugh. She tugged his hand, voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you going to leave us again when it's over?" The storm outside roared, but her words cut sharper. He bent close. "Not this time," he whispered. Harper nodded, as if a pact had been sealed. Liam pressed against his side, slipping a small hand into his. They sat together in the hallway as the house groaned around them. Thunder rattled the cabinets. A branch crashed across the porch. The power died. The lantern flickered to life, throwing warm gold across Tanisha's face. She looked at him, eyes wary but softer than before. "Tell me what you need," he said. Her gaze held his. "Stay," she said. "Not just when it's easy. When it's ugly, too." He nodded. "Okay." For a long while, the storm swallowed their words. Rain battered the roof. The wind screamed against the shutters. The children leaned into Tanisha's lap, watching her, trusting her. And when Morgan caught her eyes again, he saw not just hurt but the faintest glimmer of belief. By midnight the worst had passed. The rain softened into steady rhythm, the thunder grumbling its way east. Morgan checked the barn and found the doors still latched, the animals safe. When he returned, Tanisha was sweeping water off the porch with a broom. He picked up the second broom and started at the opposite end. They met in the middle, water dripping from the eaves. She looked at his brow, where blood had dried in a thin line. "You're bleeding," she said. "Add it to my bill," he replied. For the first time in years, she almost smiled. "You did good," she said softly. The words landed heavier than any deal he had ever closed. "Thank you." Just then Harper burst through the door. She flung herself into his arms, wrinkling her nose. "You smell like barn." "Authenticity," he said. "Very fashionable." Manson appeared at the doorway, serious as ever. Hinges held. "They did," Morgan said. "Tomorrow we'll put on a proper latch." Liam came last, silent, and slipped his hand back into Morgan's. The weight of it made him catch his breath. Tanisha watched all 3 children orbit him as if testing a new center of gravity. Her eyes were cautious but not closed. The storm had cracked something, not wide open, but enough to let a little light in. She looked at him once more. "You meant it. What you told her." "I did," he said simply. Her shoulders lowered, a knot loosening at last. "All right," she murmured. "Not forgiveness. Not yet. But no longer refusal." A door, half open, waiting. Outside, the clouds broke apart, a strip of moonlight spilling across the drenched fields. Inside, 3 small faces with storm-colored eyes turned toward him, and for the first time, Morgan felt the meaning of staying. The storm had barely cleared when a new one arrived, this one in pressed suits and polished shoes. A courier in a black sedan delivered the papers, the embossed letterhead screaming corporate power, Thorn Industries. Tanisha read the first line, jaw tightening. They're filing a claim. Improper ownership. They say the ranch was never transferred legally because of your absence. Morgan skimmed the dense paragraphs, heat rising in his chest. It was a surgical strike, designed to discredit Tanisha's claim, to exploit the years he'd been gone. His father's old allies had found their weapon. They'll drag this into court, Tanisha said quietly. They think I'll fold before it starts. Morgan looked at her. Not just at the worry in her eyes, but the fire beneath it. Not this time. They're going to learn the ranch isn't theirs to buy or bury. 2 days later, Thorne's representatives came in person. They parked 3 gleaming SUVs outside the courthouse, suits stepping out like an army. At the head stood Daniel Clark, the acquisitions officer who had mocked her chicken coop. His smirk was the same. He spread his arms wide when he saw Morgan. Mr. Anderson, you know how these things go. Property disputes, inheritance tangles. It can all be made clean with the right settlement. Name your number. Thorne pays. You both walk away rich. Tanisha stood straight beside him, her hand resting lightly on Harper's shoulder. This isn't about money, she said. Clark's smile sharpened. Everything is about money. Morgan stepped forward. His voice was steel. You don't get it. This land isn't for sale. Not for $1 million. Not for $10 million. Not for any price. Clark blinked, his confidence wobbling. Be reasonable. This is a corporate acquisition, not a family drama. Morgan's laugh was short and bitter. You're right. It's not a drama. It's my mother's will. It's Tanisha's name on the deed. It's 3 children who call this soil home. And you're not taking it. The words landed like a hammer. Even the crowd that had gathered on the courthouse steps went quiet. That night, back at the ranch, the children sat clustered around the table, unusually solemn. Harper spoke first, her voice small but clear. You didn't let them take it. No, Morgan said. And I won't. Ever. Manson leaned forward, eyes sharp. Even if it costs you your company? Morgan met his gaze. The boy had inherited Tanisha's way of cutting through noise. Even then, some things you protect with money. Some things you protect with yourself. This ranch, your mother, you 3. You come first. Liam climbed onto his lap then, clutching his shirt. Then you're our dad, he asked, the words almost swallowed by his shyness. Morgan froze. His chest tightened in a way no boardroom battle had ever done. He looked at Tanisha, but she didn't speak. She only nodded once, a permission he didn't deserve but needed. Yes, Morgan whispered, voice rough. I'm your dad. Harper's eyes glistened, and she grinned, triumphant. Told you. Manson, always the skeptic, studied him for a long beat before finally muttering, Okay, Dad. The word cracked something open in Morgan. It was more binding than contracts, stronger than any merger. It was a vow. The next morning, a reporter cornered him outside the courthouse. Mr. Anderson, Thorne claims you're jeopardizing your entire empire by holding on to a small, failing farm. What do you say to shareholders who call this reckless? Morgan didn't flinch. The cameras were rolling, the microphones pushed forward like weapons. He spoke so there would be no mistake. I've spent half my life chasing numbers. And I learned the hard way that numbers can't love you back. This land is not for sale. Not at any price. It belongs to the woman my mother trusted, and to the children I will never walk away from again. Flashbulbs burst. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was more than a statement. It was surrender of an empire and the claim of something greater. That evening, as the sun bled gold across the pasture, Morgan stood with Tanisha on the porch. The triplets were chasing each other under the pecan tree, their laughter rising like a hymn. You just burned your bridges, Tanisha said, not unkindly. Morgan nodded. Then let the ashes fertilize something better. For the first time in years, she let herself smile at him, Not bitter, not guarded, but real. "We'll see if you mean it." "I do," he said. "For once, I finally know what matters." The land was still threatened, the fight not yet over. But as night fell, the ranch felt different. Less like a battlefield, more like a home. The storms had passed. Not just the one that split the sky, or the one brought by Thorne's suits and threats, but the storm inside Morgan that had raged for years. The ranch was quiet again, golden light spilling over the fields as if the land itself was grateful for one more sunrise. That morning, Tanisha handed him a small burlap sack. Inside were seeds, corn, beans, squash, the staples she had coaxed from this soil season after season. "They'll need planting before the next rain," she said, her voice steady. Morgan knelt in the dirt, the children around him. Harper pressed a seed into his palm, small and hard, a promise waiting for a chance. "Don't drop it," she warned, bossy but bright. Manson studied the rows, already mapping out order and precision. "Spacing matters," he instructed, frowning as if a crooked line would undo the future. Liam, quiet as always, simply dug with both hands until his fingers were brown, then looked up expectantly. "Here," he whispered. Morgan planted his first seed beside his son's. He covered it with soil, pressed the earth firm, and for the first time in decades felt the weight of something that wasn't numbers or deals but permanence. Each seed was small, ordinary, and yet together they were a covenant, a future written into the ground. Harper clapped her hands. "See, King Fix-It can farm too." They all laughed, and for once it didn't sting, it healed. Later, when the children napped beneath the pecan tree, Tanisha brought out a cedar chest she had kept hidden in her room. She set it on the kitchen table and lifted the lid. Inside were journals, worn and soft at the edges, and 3 bundles of letters tied with string. "I wrote to them," she said quietly. "Every year. Sometimes every month. Things they were too young to understand then, things I didn't want them to forget later." Morgan picked up one bundle. The first letter began with Harper's name in looping script. "Today you took your first step. You didn't look back to see if I was watching. You just walked forward." His throat tightened. He opened another meant for Manson. "You ask questions with your eyes before your mouth. I pray you always keep that. And Liam's. You gave me a feather from a sparrow today. I kept it because it reminded me that even small gifts carry weight." Morgan's hands shook as he set them down. "You carried all this, alone." Tanisha's eyes were clear, not bitter. "Alone, but never without purpose. They deserved a father, even if all I could give them were words on a page." For the first time, Morgan felt the depth of her strength. Not just the storm she had survived, but the quiet, relentless building of a life in the shadow of absence. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the maid his father had dismissed, not the woman he had left behind, but the mother, the protector, the heart of a home he'd almost lost forever. That evening, they sat on the porch, the horizon washed in colors only Texas could make. Rose, gold, deep violet. The children chased each other in the yard, their laughter carrying high over the fields. "Everything's changed," Morgan said softly. Tanisha shook her head. "Not everything. The land's the same. The sky's the same. What's different is you deciding to see it." He turned to her. "And you? Do you see me differently?" Her gaze lingered on him, cautious but not closed. "I see a man trying. That's more than I expected." A silence stretched between them, not sharp but tender. He reached for her hand on the porch rail. She didn't pull away, though she didn't squeeze back either. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. When the last light faded, Morgan stood in the yard and watched the triplets run across the field, their feet scattering fireflies, their voices bright against the night. He felt the ache of everything he had chased. Towers of glass, empires built on contracts, billions that meant nothing in this moment. His mother had trusted Tanisha with the land. She had been right. Because wealth wasn't measured in numbers or power. It was in the roots you tended, the love you carried, the family that bore your storm-blue eyes and called you Dad. Morgan breathed deep, the smell of fresh earth and pecan leaves filling him. For the first time, he didn't feel haunted by what he had left behind. He felt grounded, rooted. A new legacy was beginning, not written in stock ledgers or corporate reports, but in seeds planted in the soil, in letters tucked away for children who now laughed freely, and in the fragile, precious possibility of forgiveness. And this time, he wasn't leaving. And that's how a billionaire learned that his greatest fortune wasn't in glass towers or bank accounts, but in the love of a woman he once overlooked, and the children who carried his eyes and his future. Sometimes the real wealth we're chasing has been waiting for us all along. Quiet, patient, and rooted in the soil of family and forgiveness. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay tuned for more stories that remind us of love, redemption, and the hidden treasures life places in our path.